Die-hard Trump supporters are celebrating Trump's approach to negotiating the end of the Russia-Ukraine war. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky are taking shots at each other from across the world.
Here's Trump yesterday at Mar-a-Lago.
And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic, so sad.
Zelensky, however, wasn't having it. In response to the Trump presidency's implication that the Ukraine started the war, Zelensky told reporters, "Unfortunately, President Trump, I have great respect for him as a leader of the nation that we have great respect for. The American people who have always supported us, unfortunately, lives in this disinformation space."
Now, Trump seems to be getting heat from the Washington foreign policy establishment. His supporters, however, are expressing relief. Here's former Arizona Senate candidate Kari Lake on political commentator Jack Posobiec's podcast yesterday.
I'm so excited to hear what's happening with the negotiations with Russia and then eventually with Ukraine to bring an end to this senseless war that should have never started. It's kind of like the grown-ups are back in the room again, and we're watching diplomacy happen at lightning fast speed, warp speed. And every day we're realizing things that we were told were not possible are indeed possible and are happening.
Posobiec also cheered Trump, calling his approach the art of the peace deal. Posobiec even accompanied Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to Germany, Belgium, and Poland for his diplomatic security meetings. He's not a Trump administration or government official. Even right-wing world leaders are tipping their hat to Trump. Here's Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban earlier this month.
And war. You know, in Europe in the last 3 years, it was said always that war is good, peace is bad, concerning Ukraine-Russia war. So those who argued in favor of peace and peace negotiations and communication said, you are bad guys. The good guys are who are arguing in favor of war. So now it's totally changed. So Donald Trump, president, already changed the mindset of the whole Western world. That's where we are at this moment, and it's very good for Hungary.
Fox News' Brit Hume weighed in with a slightly different approach. He told the New York Times, "I don't think he's going to sell out Ukraine. I think these early talks in Saudi Arabia are just about the contours of the table in all likelihood, and you obviously can't make peace between two countries when you're only negotiating with one." Of course, there are others who feel differently about the situation. Former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, for instance, wrote on Blue Sky, "Here's a better peace plan for Ukraine. Russia, you've already sustained twice as many casualties as the U.S. did in World War II. Leave Ukraine or suffer 4 times more and collapse as a country in the process. Done." Midas News editor-in-chief Ron Filipkowski wrote, "Trump is demanding slightly less from Ukraine than Hernan Cortez demanded from the Aztecs." And former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, wrote on X, "Concessions secured for America, nothing. So far, all the U.S. has achieved is alienating our allies, pissing off the Ukrainians, and more generally, looking weak, really weak. Looking weak in Europe will have bad implications for our interests in Asia and worldwide."
Yeah, I'm pretty far apart from those commentators you just read what they had to say. Look, I think it was a profound mistake made by Joe Biden to have no relationship or no negotiation with Russia for 3 years, for almost his entire presidency, continuing to promise Zelensky the moon and then some, that we would defend them no matter what till the end of time. They had to have known that the public appetite in the U.S. to send money and weapons to their resistance would eventually sour, that's not something we could do forever, even as thousands and thousands and thousands of Russians and Ukrainians dying because of this. Look, I don't agree with the way President Trump characterized this as that Ukraine had the agency initially. That's not the case. Russia did invade Ukraine, so Russia had the agency, and that was a horrible thing that Vladimir Putin did. But as I often say, we have to live in reality. It happened, and the sooner we bring this war to an end, the better. We have to bring it to an end before Russia theoretically succeeds in conquering the entire country. And our own military advisor, so-called realistic thinker people, strategists like Michael McFaul and others will say that, we're naive to negotiate with Putin or to trust or listen. Well, weren't you people naive to be telling the Ukrainian government that they could possibly win a war against Russia? Our military advisors, Zelensky's military advisors have known for a long time that this was a doomed effort. Other military advisors have known from the start that this was going to be a doomed effort. It's a giant country with tons of people that it's willing to use as cannon fodder in deeply immoral and unethical ways, I should say. But it was never going to result in Ukraine repelling Russia from the country unless the U.S. was going to send troops of its own or use its own weaponry, which was going to start World War III. So here we are. We need a deal to protect the rest of Ukraine. It will not be pleasant that Russia will have some of the Ukrainian territory it has achieved, but that's just the best deal we can possibly have. I have no idea whether it would happen if Trump had won re-election as state president. He says he would have stopped this war from happening. We'll never live in the counterfactual. We have no idea. But the reality is that Biden did not do anything to bring the war to a close, and now it falls to Trump to do so, and I have no problem with him meeting with Putin or having his team, Steve Witkoff, Marco Rubio, meet with Russian foreign ministers to bring this war to an end.
I think the filter for a lot, or the metric we should use for a lot of what we're seeing from this administration in just the past few weeks is how would we feel if it were us? I mean, there's that old saying, and Antony Blinken had used it when he was serving as Secretary of State, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And if you are Ukraine, you are feeling like you are not part of this conversation. It is your sovereign state. And we have to go back to the comment that President Trump made at the very beginning about they should have never started it in the first place. You can't discount that comment. It's like a poker tell about whose interests he's representing here. And certainly it is not Ukraine. I mean, part of what the ex post, the commentary that we read there at the end, part of what it was referring to is that what Donald Trump is demanding from Ukraine is basically the value of all of its critical mineral stores, half of its economic worth. I mean, these are things that there's no way any sovereign nation on earth would be willing to give up. And the idea that they would give up on their borders, their original borders, this is another thing. I mean, if I were Ukraine, I also wouldn't have a lot of confidence that the U.S. is negotiating on my behalf in good faith.
It's not an idea. It's just what's happened. I mean, how would one even propose to give back to Ukraine the territory that Russia conquered for it? Like, what? That's not something that can actually happen unless we join the fight on Ukraine's side, which is not something anyone in our government wants to do. It's not something the American people want. I don't believe the American people want to have World War III with Russia over Ukraine's borders. Do you?
I do not believe that the American people want to be sending our troops there, but I don't think that's the issue here. I think that what's happening is that Ukraine is not even part of this. And the U.S. is already making promises to Russia, just based on their own admissions, right, over the past couple of days here, that Ukraine hasn't agreed to. I think it's a matter of fairness, ultimately.
I mean, is it Ukraine or is it Zelensky, whose approval ratings I was just seeing on News Nation this morning are like 4%? This is a man who suspended elections, suspended opposition political parties, suspended opposition media in his own country, is ruling that country in a very illiberal way, admittedly in the midst of a crisis for Ukraine. I don't know, is it Zelensky's interest or Ukraine's interest? Do the Ukrainian people want to continue fighting? You see videos of them, older people outside the normal military range being conscripted to go fight and die in this conflict with Russia that could be brought to an immediate end. I see why maybe Zelensky wants to keep the conflict going to get more favorable terms, maybe for himself, for his administration, not necessarily for the country itself. I don't know that they want to fight on or have the ability to do so. And so then reality sets in, right?
So first of all, that 4% figure is what Donald Trump said during his press conference. That's actually not what the polling shows. The polling shows that Ukrainian people support Zelensky at 52%, which, by the way, is pretty close to how much the American public supports what we're doing in Ukraine. It's just over half. So there's definitely been some softening, right, in terms of support overall as the conflict continues, but it is certainly not how Donald Trump is describing it. And I think bigger picture, why is it for us to decide what happens to the Ukrainian people? Why is it for us to decide what they feel like is a fair deal? Well, and that's fundamentally it.
Well, fine. You're right. It's up to them. But we're arming them. We're giving them. We have a seat at the table because their entire defense of their country is due to the generosity of the American taxpayers. So I don't think if we're going to give money, we get something to say about it. If you want to say, if Zelensky wants to say, no, we are going to continue this fight with Russia to the last man, and to hell with you, and that's what we're doing. Yes, you're right that they have the right to do that. I think the result of that will be Russia conquering the entire country, which is not ideal from my standpoint. And honestly, is not even, I think, what Russia wants, because my understanding is that Putin wants a buffer zone between Russian territory and the NATO countries. So if they actually took all of Ukraine, then they would be on the borders of NATO, which they say they don't want. I'm not taking Putin at his word. I hear you there, but I do think even his own self-interest, what he wants is not to be up against a NATO country. But that's where we are. I think we should negotiate with. Yes, Zelensky should have a seat at the table, but he's had a seat at the table for years. It's Russia that had no access to the U.S., no conversation between our presidency and their leader. So I think it's a little bit of a rebalancing of that. But yeah, all three should come together to find a path toward peace that results in no more lost Ukrainian lives, no more lost Russian lives, and I would hope good relations between all three countries.
Yeah, I think for sure. It's just like with everything else. It's not what they're doing, it's how they're doing it. And I think that's something that we have to continue to take a look at. I also think it's really important that we don't whitewash what Russia has done and the brutality that has occurred there since 2022.
Up next, former FCC chairs are going after Trump's pick for the role, Brendan Carr. We'll discuss.